In this episode, I'm going to present a geometric link between my proposed location for the lost city of Atlantis in the Azores, Avebury Stone Circle in England, and the Richat structure in Mauritania. After watching this video, I'm sure you'll agree that this, at a minimum, is a fascinating coincidence, but perhaps this geometric relationship represents something far more significant. Now, before we get into the numbers, I think it's best that I provide a little background information on both the Richat structure and Avebury Stone Circle. The Richat structure, otherwise known as the Eye of Africa or Eye of the Sahara, is a prominent feature of concentric circles made up of intrusive and extrusive igneous rocks. The Richat structure has a diameter of approximately 40 kilometers or 25 miles and sits atop the Sahara's Adrar Plateau, located in west-central Mauritania, northwest Africa. As many of you will be aware, the Richat structure is often proposed to be a possible location for the lost city of Atlantis. With its concentric rings, it's easy to see why. I have no intention of going into any great detail on the Richat structure. There are already a number of fantastic videos on this fascinating location by people such as Jimmy from the Bright Insight channel. Also, there's a great video by George S. Alexander and Natalie Rosen that's worth viewing. If you want to watch any of these videos, I've posted links in the description below. When looking at Plato's description of the lost city in more detail, there are a number of reasons why my proposed location in the Azores might be a better match. For example, the dimensions of the ringed structure in the Azores are a much closer, if not near perfect match to Plato's description, whereas the diameter of the ring section of the Richat structure is 4 times too large at approximately 20 kilometers. I could go on, but it should be said that there is one significant feature mentioned by Plato regarding the level plain on which the lost city is located, because the Richat, or rather the Adrar Plateau on which it sits, has some very interesting properties. In Plato's Critias, it is stated, "The whole country was said by him to be very lofty and precipitous on the side of the sea. But the country immediately about and surrounding the city was a level plain, itself surrounded by mountains which descended towards the sea. It was smooth and even, and of an oblong shape, extending in one direction 3,000 stadia, but across the centre inland it was 2,000 stadia." The location I have proposed for the lost city in the Azores is most definitely located on a level plain surrounded by mountains. However, this level plain is certainly not 3,000 by 2,000 stadia in extent. If we go ahead with the 185.22 meter stadia, as discussed in my previous videos, we can say that 3,000 by 2,000 stadia is equal to 555.66 kilometers by 370.44 kilometers. This gives us an approximate area of 206,000 square kilometers. This is nearly the same area as the entirety of the Azores Plateau itself. The actual plain on which my proposed lost city is located is closer to 40 kilometers by 25 kilometers, or 216 by 135 stadia. Now, if we take a look at the Adrar Plateau, which surrounds the Richat structure, we can see that it is a level plain, smooth and even. Surrounded by mountains? Perhaps not. But maybe this is something that has been lost in translation. After all, Plato's dialogue does describe the level plain as being surrounded by mountains which descended towards the sea. Perhaps this describes a cliff, which would more accurately describe the topology of the Adrar Plateau. So what about the dimensions of the plateau itself? Quoting from Plato's Critias, across the centre inland it was 2,000 stadia. Let us take a north-south measurement across the plateau through the centre of the Richat. Here we end up with a little over 370 kilometers to the southern cliffs of the plateau, which I calculate to be almost exactly 2,000 stadia. The west-east measurement is a little more open to interpretation. The extensive sand and dune coverage makes it difficult to discern any clear edge by eye. If we take a depth profile west to east, perhaps we can crudely say that the maximum extent of this region can be defined by the location where the slope of the plateau ends and meets level terrain. I can only estimate this measurement by counting pixels, so please don't take this as some kind of precision measurement. But I estimate that the edge of this region levels out at approximately 280 meters above sea level, and has a maximum west-east extent through the centre of the Rikat of approximately 585 kilometres, which I calculate to be 3,158.4 stadia. Yes, I admit this is crude, but it does give us some indication to the extent of the plateau on which the Rikat is located. Now, before we move on to the site at Avebury in England, there are two more things I want to show. Firstly, if we take a look at the 1513 Piri Reis map, we can see what might be the Rikat structure during a time when it was still surrounded by water. The latitude is near perfect, but it looks a little too far to the east in my opinion. Piri Reis drew his map from fragments of earlier source maps, so who can tell what era this may represent? Here's another view of the Piri Reis map. This time the Portolan projections have been corrected for. This can be found in Charles Hapgood's book, Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings. The second thing I want to show you is the Tennemar crater. This crater is located a mere 200 kilometers north-northeast of the Rikat structure, on a bearing of approximately 27 degrees. The basement rocks found outside the crater, amongst other key geological features, give us a clear indication that this crater was the result of a meteorite impact. The crater is 1.9 kilometers in diameter, and was originally 300 to 400 meters in depth, although today this has mostly been filled in by thick layers of various sediments. The exposed edges are now only elevated 110 meters above the base. For reference, the famous Barringer crater in Arizona is only 1.2 kilometers in diameter, with a depth of 170 meters. What I find most interesting about the Tennemar crater is its age. It has been dated to 21,400 years old, with a margin of error standing at plus or minus 9,700 years. Essentially, this means that the object which formed this crater struck the Earth anywhere between 31,100 years ago to 11,700 years ago. The nominal date of 21,400 years coincides with the peak of the last glacial maximum. The lowest estimate of 11,700 years ago coincides with the end of the Younger Dryas, thus the end of the Pleistocene geological epoch. This also happens to be a near-perfect match for the 11,600-year-old date for the destruction of Atlantis, given to us by Plato. Now let's move on to Avebury Stone Circle. Located in the county of Wiltshire, southwest England, Avebury is actually made up of 3 stone circles, and while there may be thousands of stone circles found all around the world, there's something that makes Avebury stand out from all of the others. The largest of Avebury's stone circles is also, in fact, the largest stone circle on the entire planet. This begs the question, why did it need to be so big? Before I get into too much detail over the size of the stone circle, I should provide a little more background information. The largest stone circle at Avebury forms part of a henge, as it is surrounded by a ditch and an outer earthwork bank. The stones that make up the various rings and avenues at Avebury are made up from a type of sandstone called sarsen. It appears as if the sarsens used at the site are all fairly local to the region, but it should be said that it looks as if they were quarried from 6 separate sources, as there are distinct geological characteristics that can be used to differentiate them from one another. As many of the original stones are missing, it's hard to say exactly how many sarsen stones were used to construct the rings and avenues at Avebury. In addition to this, it's impossible to say whether some of the fallen stones are still in their original locations, although we do have some fairly sensible estimates of the numbers if we don't include the surrounding avenues. The northern inner ring appears to have been made from 27 sarsen stones. The southern inner ring appears to have been made from 29 sarsen stones, and the larger outer ring appears to have been made from 98 sarsen stones. With regards to the size of the sarsen stones, no two appear to be the same. Most of the stones at Avebury weigh in the region of 30 to 40 metric tons. The largest stone at Avebury weighs in the region of 100 metric tons. It stands 4.4 metres above the ground and is buried to a depth of 2.2 metres. This gives us a total height of 6.6 metres or 21.5 feet, making this one of the largest megalithic stones in Britain. To show how truly colossal these megaliths are, I've posed in between two of the cove stones at Avebury like a true professional. For scale, I'm 6'1" or 185 centimetres tall and weigh 285 pounds or 130 kilograms. The rings at Avebury aren't the only prehistoric monuments in the region. Avebury stands roughly at the centre of a larger Neolithic complex. Silbury Hill, West Kennet Longbarrow, Marlborough Mound and Windmill Hill are just some of the other monuments that can still be found here. It should also be noted that Stonehenge lies just 28 kilometres or 17 miles south of Avebury. In addition to its famous bluestones, quarried 225 kilometres or 140 miles away in Wales, there are many large sarsen stones that make up the construction of Stonehenge. A study led by David Nash of the University of Brighton concluded that many of the sarsen stones found at Stonehenge likely originated from what is now the Westwoods region of Marlborough, just 6 kilometres away from Avebury. The chronology of Avebury and the surrounding region is not completely understood, but the late archaeologist Aubrey Burl provides us with an estimated timeline for the various constructions within the henge itself. The first part of Avebury to be constructed was a cove of 3 stones in approximately 3000 BC. 100 years later, the cove was surrounded by what is now called the Northern Inner Circle. At about the same time, a similar circle was erected to the south. The larger outer circle, ditch and earthworks that make up the henge itself were constructed at approximately 2600 BC. It will become evident a little later in the video that this date is extremely important in how it relates to both the construction and the size of the Great Pyramid at Giza. Finally, by approximately 2400 BC, most of the avenues that surround Avebury had been completed. Okay, now that I've given you a little background information, I will attempt to explain the significance of the Rikat structure and Avebury Stone Circle in how they relate to both Atlantis and the Giza Plateau. What I'm about to show you will probably make a lot more sense if you look into the works of researchers and authors Howard Crowhurst, Richard Heath, and Robin Heath. I myself intend to spend some time this year delving deeper into their research, as I have barely scratched the surface of their findings. I will try to give you a very brief, if somewhat crude synopsis of just a part of their research, the part that relates to my own discoveries. If Howard, Richard or Robin are listening, I apologise if I've misspoken or haven't done justice to your research. For anyone not familiar with their work, I will try to post some links below, so you can check out their work directly, straight from the source if you will. So the basic premise is that for whatever purpose, but likely geodesy amongst other reasons, there are various prehistoric sites of note found around the world that seem to be linked to each other using right-angled triangles. Many, but not all of these triangles seem to have at least one edge aligned with either true north-south or true east-west. Another feature most of these triangles have in common is that they are made up from Pythagorean triples. This means that the length ratios of each edge are made up from integers or whole numbers. This is likely because the classical Pythagorean mathematics that we use in modern times hadn't been invented yet. This pre-Pythagorean form of geometry allowed you to construct right-angled triangles using other geometric shapes, such as stacked squares, rectangles and circles. It also appears that this technique was either rediscovered or inherited by the Babylonians. It seemed to work particularly well for their sexagesimal or base 60 number system. So how did I generate this triangle, and what relationships can we find here between the Rikat structure and Atlantis? Well, first I plotted a great circle line using the centre of the lost city of Atlantis as the origin. The initial bearing of this great circle is 90.00 degrees, or true east. I'm working to 1/100th of a degree as this is the maximum level of precision that Google Earth Pro will allow. The great circle stops at the point where we can draw a perfect right angle directly towards the Rikat structure. The Great Circle line that links the right angle to the Richat structure has a length of 1,741.6 kilometers. This is equal to the radius of the Moon with an error of just 0.24%. Any early civilization with a basic grasp of geometry and astronomy should be able to calculate the size of the Moon to a reasonable degree of accuracy. This would also be a useful unit of measure to communicate to future civilizations, who might be using a different system of metrology with different units of measurement. It's worth noting that our initial Great Circle line leads us towards the Pillars of Heracles. Now closing the triangle, the final Great Circle line between the Richat structure and Atlantis gives us a distance of 2,587.2 kilometers. This is also another useful number to communicate to future civilizations, as this equates to 23.3 degrees of arc relative to the polar circumference of the Earth. This is equal to the average axial tilt of the Earth relative to the orbital plane. This also defines the distance from the equator to the tropics. So 23.3 degrees is the average. Today we are at 23.44 degrees. This value fluctuates between 22.1 degrees and 24.5 degrees over the Earth's 41,000-year obliquity cycle. Before moving on, we should note the length relationship between our initial Great Circle and the line that links the Richat structure to Atlantis, as the ratio of 2,587.2 kilometers and 1,940.4 kilometers gives us an exact ratio of 4:3. There's just one more thing I want to call to attention before moving on. It's something I missed back when I was making episode 6. The total perimeter of the triangle projected to the Azores from Göbekli Tepe and Giza has a total perimeter of 2,586 kilometers. Again, this equates to 23.3 degrees of arc in relation to the Earth's polar circumference. Now it looks to me that this triangle was used at the end of the Ice Age by the Atlanteans to determine the location of a new settlement after the loss of their island home. They weren't just looking for a favourable location, they were looking for a place that could mark out the precise location of their original homeland using geographical, astronomical and geometrical relationships. We can see from the green line that Giza was built at the same latitude as the Great Meteor Seamount. If we draw another Great Circle with an initial bearing of 90.00 degrees or true east, only this time using the corner of the right angle as the new point of origin, we can find the Giza Plateau to a very high level of accuracy. Giza is located where the green line and the new red line meet. Zooming in, we can see that the red line misses the centre of the Great Pyramid by just 200 metres. Although, 11,600 years ago, we know there was only a natural mound or hillock at that location. From the standard historical model, it looks as if the henge and largest stone circle at Avebury were built at the same time as the Great Pyramid, this being 2600 BC or 7,000 years after the submergence of Atlantis. And certainly, at this point in my research, I have no reason to doubt these dates. I also don't think it's a coincidence that they were built at the same time. Like many ancient sites, I believe Avebury serves a number of different functions. This includes both astronomical observations and use in geodesy. But with regards to the subject of this video, I believe that Avebury is designed to be a reflection of both the Richat structure and the Azorean capital of Atlantis, while also acting as a geometric waypoint to find the new settlement of the Atlanteans at Giza. Now before I show you my findings, I want to point out two things. Firstly, Professor Colin Richards at the University of Highlands and Islands Archaeology Institute suggests that the stone and wooden circles built in Neolithic Britain might have represented the centre of the world, or Axis Mundi for those who constructed them. If you remember from my previous episodes, we can show that geologically, the Azores would have been at the centre of Pangaea, something a global map-making culture would have also understood, although not necessarily understanding the geology and timescales involved. The Axis Mundi will also be the focus of my next video, as there are many more stories found all around the world that seem to tell a similar tale to Plato's Atlantis and Edfu's Island of the Egg, But as we know, the island of the egg seemed to be at the centre of creation. The outer ditch at Avebury could be seen to be analogous to the rings of both Atlantis and the Richat structure. The second thing I want to show is a quote from the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus. Bear in mind that Hermes Trismegistus also seemed to represent the Egyptian god Thoth. That which is above is from that which is below, and that which is below is from that which is above. This quote seems to have been paraphrased by modern occultists and esotericists to the abbreviated, as above, so below. If we go back to the Richat-Atlantis triangle, then extend the line from the right angle, we can show that Avebury seems to be a reflection of the Richat structure. They both share a common vector precise to 1/100th of a degree that can be cut at exactly 90.00 degrees by a true east great circle with its origin at the centre of the lost city in the Azores. If we reflect the Avebury projection back towards the Richat structure as if we were folding a piece of paper, the reflected triangle looks to be a near-perfect match. That is, until we zoom in. Upon closer inspection, we can see that the yellow Avebury reflection falls short by a little over 19 kilometres. Given the precision that we've seen up until this point, I'm going to show you why this is no accident. As pointed out by Crowhurst and the Heaths, Avebury lies exactly 4/7 of the way from the equator to the North Pole, at a latitude of 51.42857 degrees north. This means that it sits 38.57143 degrees south of the North Pole. Well, if we reflect these numbers, we find the exact opposite relationship at Atlantis in the Azores. The northernmost edge of the Outer Canal sits at exactly 38.57143 degrees north, or 51.42857 degrees south of the North Pole. I've drawn a cross-section of the Earth to give this relationship a little more context. Perhaps it is not a coincidence that the slope angle of the Great Pyramid is 4.032 over 7. My final point is to show why the stone circle at Avebury is the largest in the world. I don't think its sole intention was to be the largest. I believe it represents the circle that can be drawn around the four corners of the Great Pyramid, squaring the circle, so to speak. Now there's a lot of things I've left out in this video, such as how did we suddenly jump from 11,600 BC to 2,600 BC? There's a 7,000 year missing chunk from this story. Many of you may be asking the question, is the site in the Azores Atlantis, or is the Richat structure Atlantis, or are they both part of the same culture? I think it's best that I save this until my next video, as I try to put together the story of the Axis Mundi from a number of ancient texts.